podcast.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and I believe we're going to touch upon a lot of aspects about how do you actually sell MES to manufacturers, and I think we'll be able to help a lot of people in this discussion.
No, good morning. Yeah, I'm very happy to join you and share what experience I have. But of course, MES is a very broad subject, so I'm looking forward to the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as best I can. I'll be straight and honest and transparent. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, so we were having this discussion before the podcast, and you have been in the industry for almost now, what, 30 years, and I'm not even that old. So, uh, what is interesting to me is that how did you get into MES? Because I am sure that nobody plans getting into MES. Nobody plans to get into MES. So, for people who don't know about what your journey has been like, I think that would be a good insight as to how did you start and how did you get to where you are now.
That could be quite a long story. It's actually 38 years. I mean, my career started out as a toolmaker back in the late 70s. And it sort of took me to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, where I got the opportunity to learn other languages. And then I had to, at that point, decide on, oh, do I use my new linguistic skills, or do I continue in the manufacturing or engineering space? And at the end of the day, the decision was easy. Staying in the engineering space was much more about me. And back in the mid 80s, started working on development projects for, airflow testing, for example, dimensional measurement around the metrology industry. And that's where I really cut my cloth by working in metrology, working in projects to design gauging systems for the shop floor, mainly in automotive and aerospace, to be honest with you. So my background really is in the discrete manufacturing space. And I've done some work in the process industry, but really working with companies like Ford and BMW and Daimler-Benz with these multi-dimensional gauging projects really helped me understand a lot more about the shop floor, but also the people on the shop floor. And I understand now that, of course, the shop floor is a bit different to what it was 40 odd years ago. Or in my case, probably more like 35 years ago. But I've always loved what I've done in my career. I've thoroughly enjoyed who I've worked with and the products and I suppose project teams I've had the opportunity to work with as well over the years. More and more, what I was seeing in the shop floor was the need for data collection, and collecting mainly from electronic transducers, from small camera systems, where an operator would place a component which had just been machined, or perhaps at one step in the assembly process needed to be measured dimensionally. And I used to give advice on the best way to do that. So as my career started out with more as a manufacturing engineer, I became more involved in project management and then sales. And I suppose my personality led me towards what we now call the dark side in sales. And I was working with one particular company, Lucas Aerospace, it was in this instance, down in Gillingham in the UK. And they said, you're actually quite a good sales guy. I thought, well, that's quite a nice, I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, but I was able to, I suppose, articulate what it is they needed. I then got into the software space working with, I suppose I could mention it at the time, it was with Rockwell Automation and their Datamite products. And it was using SPC on the shop floor connected to dimensional measurements like micrometers, vernier calipers, height gauges, gauging systems, where they were collecting data and they were able to make decisions using SPC, which is the classic prediction tool for predicting problems before they happen. And I suppose over the course of the 90s, this is what was really most prevalent on the shop floor. There were so many vendors out there, many, many good vendors. I was fortunate enough to work with one of the top three at that time with the ASI Datamite. But then as time moved on, I then ended up buying my dad's company, which was a metrology business. And I bought that and sold it 4 years later for 10 times what we bought it for, because we made decisions about how we went to market. This is a bit of a commercial element of that. And the company we sold it to was I worked with for 6 years, but I was traveling a lot, and I didn't want to do all that travel at the time. But I worked for a great company. At that time, it was called ATS Applied Tech Systems. Fantastic people and a number of solutions. But then I learned more about MES at that time. So the ATS business, as an independent solution provider, they allowed me or gave me the opportunity to really understand more about the shop floor at a different level, more about the need to assess the risk before you embark on a project, for example. And that's the word risk was something that always resonated with me, because personally I wouldn't want to do anything with that when taking risks. Sure, there are some risks in business, but there's some that you definitely should not take. And I then joined Lighthouse Systems, which is a pure MES business focusing mainly in the process space. And I had a very enjoyable time working there with the team, and latterly then with Infor as it was acquired. But then I've now, fortunately, I'm wearing my shirt today, working for NoMuda VisualFactory, and we operate in the discrete space. So I can take all that background of mine on the shop floor, working in the discrete manufacturing sector, with the likes of Airbus, British Aerospace, and the automotive companies. So I've got a variety of experience. I'm not an expert. I just have that experience working in that space, and understanding what people need to eradicate risk where it's possible. And I suppose now I do have a sales leadership role as the CCO in the business, but really I do still like to go on the shop floor. I like to understand, because we all need to keep on top of industry to help customers wherever we can. And whilst also recognizing that it's a very competitive space, I wouldn't be working for NoMuda now as I get towards the end of my career, um, unless I felt there was a good way to finish off my career and be successful. But that was a long-winded answer. But when I've been around for 38 years, then it's never going to be a short story.
So I was just going to ask you that, given your years of experience, we could have a separate podcast on your career itself. But but there are, I mean, there are some touch points that I want to, go a little deeper into. So from what I can understand, you started into metrology, then you kind of went a little broader into quality, and then, into MES. So you started with a niche, and then you went deep into that, and then went into more broader aspects of manufacturing. Or do you think that is an approach that actually works for everyone and something that everybody should follow? Given our a large majority of our listeners are maybe just starting their career into MES or ERP, or just getting into manufacturing, is that something you would recommend?
Goodness me, yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, you take driving lessons in order to pass a driving test and then to be able to drive a car on your own. In my
That
view,
is what I thought, but I am not able to do that yet. So I have taken close to 25 driving lessons, but I'm still on my way.
and it is a good example of the need to understand more about the car before you're able to drive it. And in the world of MES, where I now firmly sit, it was, I mean, during the course of my career, I've been to hundreds, if not over 1,000 manufacturers around the world. And having that experience of having walked the shop floor, met with people, understand their mentality and their approach to business and the improvements they wish to take, being that person, not necessarily a consultant, but with someone with genuine interest in understanding what manufacturers do on the shop floor, helps an enormous amount. I don't think the MES world, and this might be slightly controversial, I don't think you can take someone from like working in a supermarket and then who's a great salesman on the shop floor and then put them in the MES space. I mean, they'll be walking in completely blind. But with MES, as with many of the people I know connected to on LinkedIn, they have worked on the shop floor. They've been through it. They've seen the challenges faced by manufacturers. And I think without that, how on earth can you really be talking competently about what customers need and, well, what manufacturers need in this instance? So for me, it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I mean, you can read about it, but you wouldn't actually know it.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely true.
So, but you mentioned that you were able to buy your dad's company and then you sold it for 10x for what you bought it for. Can you tell us a bit more about that story?
But so, yeah, so the time when I left Rockwell, I think it was 1997, I think it was.
So you were
And
working for Rockwell and that company simultaneously at the time?
I was working for my dad's company,
Okay. Yeah.
and we represented Rockwell Automation Datamite at the
Mm-hmm.
time. My dad's business was metrology, it was a quality business. It focused on the shop floor, as I was talking earlier. But that's when we got approached by Rockwell Automation. And after 3 years, they approached me directly and said, "Would you like to come and join us?" Which meant I had to make the very emotional decision to leave my dad's company
Mm-hmm.
and go to work for Rockwell, which is out of the US, Minnetonka in Minnesota. And I think, whereas that was a very difficult decision for me to make, I was determined to make more of a career because I didn't want to be regarded as somebody who has a silver spoon. So I went off to do something, and I'd always worked really hard for my dad, and for which he was always grateful now. Bless him, he's now passed away. Um, but after about 3 years, my dad said, "Look, I'm going to sell the company," and I said, "Well, I'll buy it." So I said to him, "I'll buy it." Obviously, I'd bought it at a bit of a rock bottom price from him, gave him the comfort of some good retirement. And then we didn't rebuild the company because it was already really in good shape. But we were able to understand more, having understood more about what the market does, we were able to invest in more people to talk to more businesses around. We just built a strategy that really worked. And we started to, I guess, dip our toe into other people's territory, like some of the competition. And there was this, as I mentioned earlier, ATS came along. There was some parallels in what we were doing, and I was very fortunate to have worked for the chairman at the time. I can mention his name is Mike James, who taught me an awful lot about not just about business, but also about how to go about speaking to manufacturers and giving them that advice. And that really is where I learnt my career around MES. And that really started in around about 2007, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so took it from there. But he bought my business at that time for, as I said, 10 times what I bought it from my dad. So he must have done quite well during that period. But for me, it's all about people. So
But then I'm sure it must have felt like a win, right, back then. But then from owning a business, you went into, let's say, working for somebody. Usually what happens is we do the reverse, right? We in our head we want to build something of our own. Now you have done that already, and then you went into working for somebody. How did that go in your head? I mean, what was that conversation like?
I think the answer to that is what I was saying is about people.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do more. I didn't have the money really to invest to make the company what I really wanted it to be. We'd done so much. I'd made many mistakes. I mean, of course, you don't do the things right until you've made a mistake. You need to make the right decisions. I made many poor decisions. Luckily, there were more good decisions than poor ones. But when I was approached to sell the company, to buy the business from me, it was about the people who were buying the business, who were within the ATS Supply Tech Systems business, and that made it a very easy decision. And I had a lot of freedom at that time, and stayed with the business for 6 years, which I will always be grateful for. So, yeah,
And
that's a bit of
did
a
you
fluffy
also think
answer, but I don't over compliment people that I've worked with, but because they're all good.
But did you also think at the time that going there, I would be able to, learn something that I don't have currently? Basically, I would get a much broader outlook into manufacturing. Was that also a thought in your head?
Yes, because I was one of the bigger accounts there. I think I didn't really want to mention too many end users, but I will mention one was Rolls-Royce Aerospace, and that was a company who had bulging order book, for
Yeah.
the next 30 odd years, and probably still the same now. But there were so many issues on the shop floor. But the way that the business was addressing those was something quite new to me, to
Mhm.
understand how MES was going to benefit Rolls-Royce Aerospace. And I mean, I think at the time they went forward with the Siemens product. But I'm not sure how that went. I'm sure it went absolutely fine. But it was an experience which proved to be very valuable to me because I could see what we as a business were doing in line with Siemens at the
Yeah.
time, but
Yeah.
also what was right and what was wrong.
Hmm.
Learning from what was wrong, of course, helps you sort of level things out and improve over time. Does
Yeah.
that answer your question? I hope it does.
Yes. The follow-up to that question will be, let's say in MES now, you worked with ATS, then Lighthouse, Infor, and now NoMuda. Given your experience in the different industries, how do you see the conversation around MES being changed now? Back when, let's say in the 2007, when you started in MES, and today, do you think that the adoption is increasing in terms of people are less resistant to the idea of getting an MES now?
Uh, yeah, I mean, often comes down to money, doesn't it? Because you engage with a customer. Yeah, well, let's just start from the beginning. A customer, a manufacturer identifies a need,
Mm-hmm.
and they establish their budget. They have a team of key stakeholders in the business, and they have a timeline. And those four, I mean, we call it the BANTs, the budget, authority, need, and timeline. Those are the four key areas that in sales that you need to understand before going to the next step in the conversation or in the engagement. And if you look at, I mean, I don't name any particular customer in mind here, but unless you've got those four letters in the acronym, then there's possibly there's a reason perhaps not to engage. But then again, it's all about asking questions and understanding what those real needs are. But so it's all about the pains and the challenges that customers face and by not addressing them, what will it cost them in the future? And I mean, it's all associated with risk at the end of the day. And what can they do to improve their processes? I mean, I know these are all obvious things for people listening to this podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
it's all about people, process, and product. And those things have to be considered by all the key stakeholders. So getting all of those stakeholders involved in the conversation means that you're ticking boxes through the engagement, because if there's one person or one department who doesn't believe in what MES will bring to the business, then it's very, very difficult have a smooth engagement with the company.
Especially if there's some data that you are expecting from them or some support that you're expecting from them, because they're not going to make it run smoothly, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a case of you don't know what you don't know, which is the most ridiculous thing to say, but it is actually quite relevant in this case. Because if you haven't got a team within the manufacturer who are absolutely on board and aligned with what their objective is, then because you may have one of the stakeholders, let's just say somebody in process engineering, or maybe a continuous improvement person who's looking at several different vendors, as every manufacturer should. They shouldn't just go straight in and just go for one vendor. They should look at maybe 10. Yeah, it presents a lot of work, of course, but this is where the vendors should be and must be helping the manufacturers to understand what they need to do. So give them the guidance of what the questions they need to ask, and not just of the company that I would work for, but for the other vendors as well. And this is where the competitive space, of course, plays such an important part. We need to understand our competitors, what they do from a sales strategy perspective. But the competitors, we also need to have the same goal in addressing the pains that a customer has. And I could talk for hours about this, to be honest with you, but I know we haven't got that much time. So.
We will have 2 or 3 parts. No worries.
Yeah.
No, but that is something that I definitely agree with, because so there was this manufacturer that we were working with, and it was a greenfield in terms of they were just setting up their factory. And before setting up their factory, they had already decided what their MES was going to be. And because we are into, let's say, consulting and services, our question was, how did you reach to this decision? To which there was no answer. Oh, because we are buying this from them and it is going to be a seamless integration. But that's like a school level answer, right? I mean, what do you say to that?
Had a similar experience. In fact, several experiences similar to that. And it was only about 3 years ago. I don't think it would be wise of me to mention the particular factory, but there's a history which resulted in their demise. We were working with a consultancy business in
Yeah,
competition to Tata
yeah.
at the time. And so they were sort of partnering with us, and we were one of 11 vendors by this prospective end user
Hmm.
in the UK, and we were removed at the first hurdle. And I went back to the consultant business, and I'm trying to try not to mention their name because it wouldn't be fair, because they're a very, very good company. They came back and said, "Oh, you've been deselected," and I said, "Why?" We've seen the requirement, the RFI, and we know what it is they need. We've ticked 90% of the boxes. I mean, it's term out of the box, not my favorite term because it's a bit of overselling for me. But
Hmm.
if you by ticking all those boxes, I said to them, "Well, why is it?" He said, "Well, I don't know. They just deselected you." I said, "Why?" But you need to ask why. We need to learn why we've been removed from the process. And it turns out you're not big enough. And I said, "Not big enough." At the time, the business I was working for, we had a very sizable project delivery team.
Hmm.
We had the reputation of working that particular vertical, and yet so I fought the fight, and we were brought back into the process. We were introduced to the people from the manufacturer. We had to explain why they really would be making a mistake by excluding us.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a very bold move on our part. We got then to the last round of three companies
Hmm.
from the 11, and we were awarded it because we told the truth. We were transparent. We said, no, we're not perfect. We do, and it's not the company I work for right now, because this was in the process industry, but it was more about they weren't listening. It was more like we'd made a decision, and at the end of the day, they were going to go with one vendor. We found out later, and that vendor would have presented them with a lot of risk because it was in a space that that vendor wasn't necessarily very strong in. And my former colleagues will know exactly which company I'm talking about right now if they're watching this podcast. But we were awarded the project, and it was very, very lucrative. Sadly, after about 8 months of receiving the go ahead, the business collapsed and it did not proceed. It's in the automotive sector, so you can let people work it out for themselves. But I don't think it would be fair of me to mention the company names.
Yeah. So, couple of interesting points there. So, you said because you had that background in that industry that helped you also, to win that project. How important do you think is that the MES vendor or even system integrator has worked in that industry so that they can deliver that project in that particular industry? Do you think that is important, or do you think that in its essence manufacturing remains the same, and given time and people who have good knowledge, that gap can also be bridged? What do you think?
Well, it certainly helps.
Yeah.
I don't think it's critical. I mean, it would be easy to say that, so, oh, we've done lots of implementations of your industry. It's been very, very successful. You'd be wise to go with us. But I don't think that's the right way to do it at all, because your reputation comes from referenceable customers.
Hmm.
And having a reputation in that industry speaks volumes. And I think inviting a particular manufacturer to speak to an existing customer who, I guess they must not be in the same space or be competitors, because then they'd be sharing information which they would not normally want to share. But if you take one particular industry, and let's say the electronics sector, for example, we wouldn't have another electronics company acting as a reference, but they will know that we've done it already. But
Hmm.
the proof is always in the pudding, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
understanding the requirements on the one hand, which you're doing through some level of product consultancy and the sales engagement. But for me, if you say, "Oh, we've done it in this industry," yes, I think it does speak volumes. It does help a lot. particularly in the electronics industry. But I could talk for a long time about this particular subject because it's about being transparent and honest with every engagement. But if you have not got experience in that industry as a
Hmm.
vendor and you're selling to another manufacturer, not in the same space, just tell them that you haven't. Nobody's perfect, because whereas we're addressing risk on the one hand for the customer to try and solve it, we're also presenting risk by being transparent. And for me, it's all about tell the truth and you don't have to have a good memory.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that going forward. Yeah. Okay. I have a lot of questions, a lot of different things to talk about now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were deselected and then you went on to actually win the project. So in that scenario, because I am working in, let's say, the services or the consulting business, I see that a lot of times procurement teams just have to present three options. And that is why they have those options. They have already made the choice, and the other two companies are just there for, it's a process, right? So in that scenario, let's say a company does not have experience, direct experience in that particular industry.
Are you talking about a vendor or a manufacturer? No.
I'm talking about the vendor. Let's say the vendor who is pitching for that particular project does not have direct experience in that industry. What would you say is the best way to approach this from a sales point of view?
Well, first of all, be honest from the outset. Make it clear from the outset that, we don't have experience in your space, but we do have experience in solving problems, the similar problems that you have in other manufacturers. So it's all about the problem and how it can be solved at the end of the day for me. You may not have experience in, say, use the electronics example again. You've been successful in electronics. Does it mean you can't be successful in the food and beverage industry, for example?
Hmm.
It doesn't mean that at all. You might not know all the terminology, but it's about the solution addressing the pains for people, processes, and product. So I don't think it precludes any vendor from working in a different industry. It's just that some vendors will probably do it better than others.
Yeah, because they just know the terminology, right? And as long as you can try to understand what the problem is, build the solution, and get buy in from your manufacturer, I think you're good to go in that regard. Yeah.
I mean, why would you want to take a risk of working with a manufacturer when you might know the terminology, you might be saying all the right things, you might build the right relationship, but why present risk to yourselves as vendors working in an industry when you may do a great sales pitch, but it should not preclude you from being able to engage with a different process versus discrete, for example. If the
Mhm.
solution delivers what it says it will, and having done it with other companies, why can't you sell into other business?
Definitely. I think that is something that is very useful, and I will, use some of that going forward also when I am making that conversations. Yeah. One important point that you mentioned is do not go looking for a vendor if you don't have your problem defined. Yeah. And I think that is something that I see a lot. So you don't have your requirements. At least the example that you mentioned, they at least had the RFI. In one of the scenarios that I was working with, they had selected the vendor even before releasing the RFI. So, as a manufacturer, what would you recommend in terms of due diligence that has to be done before selecting, choosing an MES vendor, or even deciding whether you want an MES or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me think carefully about how I answer this. Well, Gartner is a great go-to for information as an advisory service on, recommendation. I mean, if I just do my sales pitch for NoMuda, is the peer insights, voice of the customer from Gartner is a great source of honesty from end users. And if you look at the table and the Gartner's peer insights, we feature as the highest rated, for example, big sales pitch. But there are other vendors on there who are equally good. I'm
Yes.
not going to knock any of our competition. When a manufacturer has an issue they wish to solve and they've established their stakeholders, they've got their team together, they understand what the pains are between them, so collectively they know what they want. There are so many vendors out there in the market, and I will always be positive about what a vendor will deliver because I'm on that side of the fence. Um, but there are some vendors who perhaps will not be a good fit what they are. So it's having doing that research. Gartner is a great go-to to get that level of information to help them put the vendors on the list for who they want who to get the bids from.
Mm-hmm.
Aligning them with their processes, their products, and their people is going to be important. I mean, I don't know how many vendors there are. Maybe you know better than I do, Kunal, but there's probably I could probably list 30 right now around the world in the MES space, and they could probably. I mean, there are those that focus on the process industry. There are those who focus on discrete, and those who focus on mainly on the batch area, and there are those that do all of it
Mm-hmm.
or some of it. Having a vendor that is perhaps dedicated to one particular space, like complex assembly, for example, as we focus. I don't think there are many vendors in this space, thankfully. That's great news for us, which means we are positioned well. But understanding what the vendors do rather than just picking a brand name. Brands speak volumes, but reputations are far greater. So again, looping back to what Gartner would say, not just about us, but about other vendors as well, is something which I would strongly encourage the market to or manufacturers to head to.
Yeah. So you mentioned about Gartner. When I am selecting an MES product, do you think it is true that most of these products can do the job that I want the product to do? I mean, there are seldom any products that you can't handle order management, material management, quality management, take care of maintenance. That those are very standard requirements and very standard functionalities. So, I mean, most products can do what you want. So, do you think the team which actually is engaged with you and who is going to deliver the actual solution for you, I think that is more important. I mean, how do you balance that?
If you take the classic ISO 95, the levels from 0 to 4 at the top, and of course
Yeah.
MES is in the level 3 space, but it
Yeah.
does overlap into level 2 as well, as it
Hmm.
would do a little bit of an overlap into an ERP because it would take over some of those functions. But with MES, I mean, it's such a broad subject, isn't it? I mean, you talk about quality management, we're talking about production engineering, we're talking about maintenance management, we're talking about traceability, inventory, the bill of materials, etc. I mean, any vendor in the MES space will be able to address all of those.
Hmm.
But it's how it's all put together at the end of the day. Is it a single solution that encompasses all that functionality? And
Hmm.
all that functionality then has all these modules within it which perform specific functions, such as SPC, as we mentioned earlier on, such as asset management.
Hmm.
If you go, I mean, kind of another subject we could just talk forever on. The ERP would do quite a bit of what MES will do, and MES will do quite a bit of ERP. So there's that overlap, which is unavoidable. I mean, I feel strongly about ERP solutions dipping into the manufacturing space as a whole, and that
Hmm.
might come across as quite controversial. If you take an MES, you've got to make sure you identify what functionalities exist within it. And I'm going to use the term I don't like, out of the box, because it would be easy for several vendors to write the extra code to perform the functions that any particular manufacturer needs, but that presents risk, right? It's like many of the companies we would work with, and still probably 50% of the manufacturers we engage with, have homegrown solutions which do everything they want, but it's presenting risk. And we are involved with a very big opportunity right now, somewhere in the world, which has something like 17 applications on the shop floor. It might be more than that, actually. But there are vendors out in the market who would be able to address those with a single solution. And it's understanding, what that vendor does in absolute truth, because we can all sell, perhaps oversell what we can actually do. But having, somebody in the technical area, somebody in project management in the business, listening into the sales conversation, they can put them back on track if they start to drift off and perhaps exaggerate what they can actually do. And I come back to the same word, risk. Why present risk when actually you're trying to solve it? So understanding what manufacturers really want and which vendors they need to go to. To your question, um, it needs strong research. It needs good research. I mean, Tata, for example, you represent some very good vendors out in the marketplace. You would not have selected those vendors to work with unless you had absolute confidence in that they will be able to serve you as a business and your manufacturers very well.
Definitely, because there are probably every city has now an MES software company. Yeah, it's popping up everywhere. And all of these companies want to partner with big names, let's just like Tata. And again, we have to make that qualification in terms of what vendors we want to work with. Yeah. But let's say going back to the due diligence to be done by the manufacturer. So you mentioned the example of the manufacturer having 17 different applications. And we all know that that is an average day in the world of manufacturing because these applications are developed, built, bought as and when required. These are mostly bespoke solutions. And, you know, new leadership comes in, they want to do something fancy, they bring in a couple of applications, then they go, then somebody else comes in, and, the cycle goes on. So, l- making it, let's say, a broader conversation, MES or otherwise, any software, how important do you think is to have a long-term roadmap and then decide as to, let's say, in the next 2 years, we are going to do this so that we are on track for our, let's say, 5-year, 10-year timeline? How important do you think that is?
I mean, absolutely critical, of course. But in this day and age, you don't know how businesses have ownership transfer, right? I mean, going back to the question, the point about applications, they usually arise as a result of acquisitions. So, you get one company buying somebody else in the same space, in the same industrial space, and they inherit applications which they put to use. But ultimately, I mean, we all see it, and people listening to this and other vendors will see it all the time. You'll have one company that's evolved, having bought maybe 5 different companies into
Yes.
one business, headed up by a holding business. But they'll have between them all, they might have something like 50 different applications for doing various things. They might be using Excel to do a lot of the work. At the end of the day, MES biggest competitor is Microsoft Excel. I mean, it's a very cheap way of doing things. It's obviously not the best way to approach
The
it. Certainly
OG
not sustainable.
MES is manual Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, I haven't heard that term before, but yeah, but it's not sustainable, is it? Yeah. So there are several views of it, but if you take that view, a company that has made these acquisitions at the time they do it, they must be thinking about the consolidation or perhaps the reduction of all these siloed applications into one. And again, supporting the MES vendors in our space, there are many out there that will be able to do that, but it takes time. And we are working with several companies at the moment in the US who have acquired businesses in their space. They have a roadmap, and the roadmap is, I think it's 4 years. They want to actually take everything they have and bring it to the pinnacle where they have a single solution to do them all in the cloud, hosted in our case with AWS as a software as a service
Mhm.
or a subscription somewhere in the cloud. But there's the roadmap to do that. I mean, of course, it's costly, but it's manageable and it takes time. You should never rush into it, and that of course we've all learnt from it. We've seen failed deployments because they have a timeline and they take forever to place the purchase order, and then suddenly the timeline's like 6 months when it started out as 12 months. Well, we still want the same timeline. Well, that's just not possible. So things have to shift. Yeah. So the roadmap needs to be clearly defined, but I've not seen many manufacturers actually, again, as controversial as this might sound, who've really nailed down what their roadmap is. And I don't think it's something you can develop overnight. And much of the time, you need to sort of step aside. I mean, regular project management, understanding what the goals are during the course of the project. But yeah, not having a roadmap, risk.
I think why it is so challenging is because the point that you mentioned earlier when I asked you about how the conversation around MES has changed is it all boils down to money, basically, right?
Yeah.
And because you want to justify that ROI in a set period, uh, that is why you're rushing things, buying different things. Uh,
Well,
how
I
do you
think it
approach
comes down
how do you
to,
approach the ROI conversation? Okay,
well,
sorry, you
it's,
were saying something. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say it's the BANTs I mentioned earlier. I know it's a very simplistic way of doing it, but it's actually a very effective: budget, authority, need, and timeline. Why would you engage if they've got no money, if the customer has no money to spend, right? The authority, sure, that can be established. The need, absolutely critical, because that's where the pains are, and that's what they want to address, and the timeline as well. But the budget and the need, you've got to have those. And in my early, perhaps less experienced days, and I'm going back to the late 90s now, I would go into a company, we would do a really good pitch to them, we'd address everything, we'd be told that we did everything right. But then I'd ask about the budget at the end. And they say, oh, no, we've got to use what we gleaned from the vendors to establish a budget. Oh, my God. That I learned some tough lessons from doing that. But these days, these need to be part of the conversation, because at the end of the day, we are selling a solution to solve problems in a manufacturer's on their shop floor. So we have to make sure we ask those questions. But yes, it's all down to money.
So when you say BANT, right? When you say authority, is that the economic buyer that you're
Yeah.
interacting with? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And would you recommend going in that particular order when you're having that conversation with the manufacturer?
No, there's so many departments you have to engage with, right? So I'm a believer that there's only one economic buyer in a business. There is somebody always at the top who makes the
Yeah.
final decision, and
Yeah.
that person is the one that holds the purse strings.
Hmm.
And they'll be the people who actually set out the guidelines for engagement and who would be engaged as regards stakeholders. Got to establish that, avoiding that word risk is making sure that there's a step-by-step process to this, all that all ultimately goes to the person who holds the purse strings.
Yes, but let's say from a project perspective, would you recommend look at the budget first, then talk to the right people, then establish if they have an actual need, and then look at the timeline? Do
No, I
you?
would do it the other way around. I would want to
Okay.
understand the need first,
Yeah.
because if they haven't got a problem to solve, why waste each other's time
Yeah.
at the end of the day? Yeah, so need is really number one.
Hmm.
The timeline, as long as it doesn't take too much time to establish it, because you can get this out of a single conversation, and as long as you're asking the right questions, you'll get
Yeah.
the answers you need to hear. If you don't get the answers you need to hear, then you won't even get to the budget stage.
Mm. Very interesting. I think the BANT framework is something that is very valuable for our listeners, and I hope that it kind of eases up the conversation between manufacturers, vendors, system integrators, because I think a lot of communication there is not needed. In terms of a lot of time is wasted in talking to different people. It's like a government organization, like, or manufacturing companies. Manufacturers operate in a certain hierarchical way, right? And those are also the challenges that need to be addressed.
As in parallel, there's also the relationship element. So there's got to be that trust and confidence. So you've got to build a relationship with the manufacturers so that they recognize you as you're being transparent.
Hmm.
And of course, they're delivering the same level of transparency to you. So by asking questions, you'll get the answers. You're asking the right questions, you'll get the answers you need. And again, it's all about avoiding risk at the end of the day, to make sure that the vendor delivers on the promise at the time that they're selected.
So, how do you think the conversation changes when you talk to a smaller manufacturer and when you talk to, let's say, a large manufacturer? Do you think there is a change in an approach?
Yeah, there is. I mean, smaller manufacturers need some form of MES, the same as any multinational conglomerate would at the end of the
Yes.
day. But then again, there's going to be the economies of scale as the conversation, because a smaller manufacturer is unlikely to have the funds to fund to fund an MES project of any magnitude. So a lighter version of MES there are many vendors out there again who would be able to mobilize a team and build from their existing solution a smaller solution to address a need for a smaller manufacturer, perhaps just a single site. We have a customer in Chicago. It's a huge manufacturer of transmissions to the
Mhm.
automotive industry. And they started out as a small business, but they implemented our MES, of course. I'll say that. And that was 8 years ago, so before my time with NoMuda. And now there's something like, I think there's something like 1.2 billion now. But at that time, I think there was something like 200 million. So, you know, they've multiplied the size of their business by a factor of 6 by using a solution which has helped them make informed decisions on the shop floor and expand their business. So a small business investing in MES, yeah, they should. It depends on their roadmap for their growth that they do with their business as well. So yes, it's all scalable. But you have to tell them that it does cost money. You know, if you're a small business, it's still going to cost you money. But there might be things we can do to perhaps ease the hit on their expenditure.
Yeah, so I mean, this was like from a product point of view, in terms of the requirements of a smaller manufacturers are different from, let's say, a larger manufacturer in terms of what MES they want, right? But from a conversation point of view, I think a smaller manufacturer might not have the literacy of what MES is. Then how do you sell them an MES?
Not sure I agree with that, actually. I think they do have the literacy they need. It's in a smaller company, you'll have many people wearing more than one hat.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean for a minute that they don't understand what MES will deliver for them. But is it always MES? Is it just some level of manufacturing intelligence that they need to have on the shop floor? I'll talk about an MES light or a lighter MES solution for them. But I'm not sure I agree with that. Actually, I think they do have the knowledge. It's just how they scale it to solve their problems in the business.
So I think the approach there is not to go in with an MES, but try to understand the problem. And if you as a company can deliver on that problem, then you have a match.
I think effectively, yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I would say. Yeah. Do you not agree with that? I mean, you know, you're in the business as well, but how do you see that?
Okay. So from a smaller manufacturer, let's say, if you take at job shops, for example, yeah, they might not even understand how MES will help them, right? Because if they are performing their quality checks on paper, and for them it is just having, let's say, an iPad as a replacement of a paper, and it can save them some time, but you have to educate them on each of these functionalities, each of these aspects, wherein as a larger manufacturer there is no conversation of how the MES will help you. It is mostly about what MES they want to pick, from my experience. And when you go smaller and smaller, it is more about how the solution will help you. So even you probably don't even have to talk about what MES is. You just have to say that, we will implement this particular solution which will improve your quality, and we will evaluate the improvement in quality in, let's say, these 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters. I think that is what something that might work. What do you think?
Yes, so you are talking like an MES light here. So you address issues in phases. You don't do it all in one go. Because you do all things in one go, like a big blast, then that's obviously a terrible way to do things, a very dangerous and very risky way to approach it. But for a smaller, like a job shop or a smaller manufacturer, issue may be recalls on quality.
Mm-hmm.
Talk them through a solution, perhaps not relevant to what you're selling, but maybe give them some guidance to gain their trust on what a QMS solution would give to them. Perhaps SBC, something as simple as that. And whereas, of course, it's something from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it is still around. That
Yes.
would solve a problem. And then once that's solved, then move on to the next area of the MES solution. So you can buy it in pieces in order to
Yes.
achieve your goal. So, yeah, I do agree with that.
So that brings me to one point. You said the big blast or the big bang, as we call it. Uh, does that almost always not work?
Like I don't think it works all the time. God, I don't know how to answer that question without being absolutely blunt. No, I don't think it works. I think it's just presenting risk. It's a problem. It's a recipe for failure. Particularly if you try to do a big blast or a big bang in a time frame or the desired time frame that the manufacturer has. Just be straight with, if it's going to overrun, tell them it's going to overrun. Make sure that you've planned the project in such a way that it will deliver on the promise. But I mean, MES projects often overrun. If they're done correctly, they often overrun, because it's just absolutely critical that everybody is aligned, that the stakeholders and the vendor are absolutely aligned in what it is they're doing. So yeah,
I
it
actually
really is.
agree with you, because this is something that I have said before, that you can do everything, you can do so many things, but you can only do one thing at a time. Yeah. And I think that phased approach gives you the ability to iterate, and it tells you where you're going wrong, so that you can iterate and then make your implementation better. While in the big bang, as you said, anyway you have a short timeline, and with all the procurement and the deals, everything to go through, you anyway shorten the timeline, and then the scope does not reduce, however, so you're kind of stuck doing everything in that shortened timeline.
But yeah, if I mention again that company with 17 different applications on the shop floor, ranging from quality to traceability, production management, for manufacturing intelligence on the shop floor, that's a classic example of the need for an iterative process, or given that agile deployment, as we often call it, but taking it in true project management and do it piece by piece rather than all in one go. It's all about the people. You want to make sure that the operators are not just well trained, but they're empowered. And these are terms that everybody watching this will be familiar with. But without an empowerment, without that training, you I guess it's just ticking the box to make sure that is done before you move on to the next one. Doing it all at the same time, yeah, I'm not sure that's a great way of doing it.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. So we were talking about some functions of MES and ERP having some overlap.
Yeah,
And manufacturers don't debate whether they need an ERP or not. Not now. Almost everybody has an ERP, but that is not the same with an MES. So you don't actually have to sell the ERP to the manufacturer. They already know. Yeah. Do you think that MES has just starting to pick up the pace in terms of manufacturers are realizing now that this is something that I must have? And just as back when ERP was starting, that is where now where MES is.
absolutely, 100% agree. I mean, I could expand on my answer there, but I think you've just answered it in your own question. I mean, MES, I mean, I'm always going to be biased towards the manufacturing and towards the shop floor, but you still need to have the business systems in place to, produce work orders and to present them to the shop floor. But the shop floor is where the margins are made. This is where you reduce your costs. So every manufacturer, again, the completely biased view, should be focusing on getting MES done on the shop floor and then do ERP later. But we're seeing the other way around, as I'm sure you'll agree. Right
Yes.
now, an MES project will be held up because, we've got to get the S4 HANA done first before we can do the shop floor. Um, they're often managed by different teams, but you've got manufacturing IT and you've got business IT, but smaller
Yeah.
companies, they'll all be one. I
Yes.
understand that perhaps you need to focus on ERP first rather than the shop floor, but the shop floor, the manufacturing engineers will want the MES in place because they know what they need and they want to address those pains that they have. So for me, every day of the week, MES is more important.
And I think this bifurcation as to ERP is a business application, then MES is operations. Yes, but MES is also affecting your business directly, right? Let's say product recalls, or if you don't have good quality, that is something that affects your business directly. I think that relationship has to be established, and it's not like ERP, just because you have your invoicing in that application does not mean that it is responsible for everything in your business, right?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is you can still do your invoices in Word and Microsoft Excel, but on the shop floor, you're dealing with any issues to eradicate any problems, any recalls. But yeah, so I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. So on that, because there is a lot of education that is happening on MES, benefits of MES, I am sure you see a new post every day on LinkedIn. I
Yeah,
mean, at least from me, I try to post almost every day.
yeah, of course. There are others as well, of course, but yes, I do read them all.
So, but the question there is, how do you think is the conversation on LinkedIn helping or not helping, or is it absolutely not useful? I would love to have your take, and I want you to be as open as you can.
Again, I'm stepping into a space which may, I'm not saying upset some people, maybe just kick a few tables over,
Yeah,
but there are so many of them.
that is perfect for that is perfect for the podcast. To be honest, it'll get us more views.
Yeah, it's just that I mean, there are so many podcasts, everybody's saying the same thing. I watch yours all the time. There's another, I won't mention the other names as they're
Yeah,
not on this podcast,
yeah,
but there are several talking about MES and the problems it addresses, and they're all extremely valuable to in there. I often think that there's probably a biased view towards who they are as a vendor, so it's actually a lot of selling within that, but
yes,
actually they are extremely informative because it's really sharing their experiences as vendors and
yes,
what manufacturers should be thinking about. So yeah, they do have value, but everyone's saying pretty much the same thing. I like the people like yourselves. We just want manufacturers to listen. We want them to take on board the advice, the issues that, as vendors, as in the MES space, we've seen it all. Not everybody would have experienced it from the shop floor perspective, but will have seen the issues and addressed them in one form or another. So yeah, I do think it's very, very valuable. But yes, it's an interpretation at the end of the day of what's being said. But yeah, I mean, yours particularly, Kunal. I know it's easy to compliment you as you're on here, but you're working for Tata Technologies. This is an enormous business with vast experience in this space, and therefore you're able to give some very competent advice based upon your experiences as a business. And that is of much greater value, I think, as on LinkedIn.
what needs to change?
What needs to change in what's said on LinkedIn, or what needs to change as regards the MES? What do
I
you
would
mean?
say let us. I mean, since we are on the conversation of thought leadership, let's say, let us bring it. Let us make it a little broad. Let us not talk about LinkedIn, but thought leadership in general uh, on MES. So, what needs to change?
Yeah, the list would be quite long, but I would think I just need to bring it into one step. MES
So, just tell us the most controversial thing you can think of.
MES costs money, and that any manufacturer investing in MES has to accept that the vendor has a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. Therefore, they do not want risk. So it's, of course, making sure that the risk is addressed, but then the solution that's offered, do not go for the cheapest solution. It's not always the best one. If you can find the cheapest, but it's the solution that addresses it in the best possible way and sustainable way for you, then go for it. But it's not about the cost. It's about the delivery and what it would solve as regards your pains and reduce your risk. And I don't think that's controversial. I think it's obvious, but you'll be surprised, and you may not be surprised. But I've worked in some areas around the world, engaged with customers where they push you down on price and cost, and you presenting that they're almost transferring the risk to you as a vendor. And it's at that point you say, "Oh, hold on a second. We're here to help you. We've got a balance sheet. We've got people we need to report to in the business to make sure that we're making money. We're not going to rip you off. You've got to make sure that they understand that if you feel strongly that your solution is the best fit and you've established through other stakeholders with the manufacturer that you are the best solution, then you don't have to drop your price. It's all about the value you deliver to the company. So I don't think it's controversial. I just think it's obvious. It's just that so many, let's say, cultures don't see it quite that way.
Yeah, I
Does
think.
that answer your question?
Yeah, it was. I was surprised as to how honest you were. Yeah, and I absolutely like that, because a lot of manufacturers don't understand. It is like they're out to buy vegetables, but it's not that, right? I mean, it is a complex product which handles complex processes, which has people involved, and a lot of lives get affected, using that software day to day, making sure that it is actually improving what you do. So it is a complex thing that they're buying. And I think that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and I think there's also that case of overscoping. And overscoping is something that we've all seen in the vendor space, but also the manufacturer would come in and they would overscope what it is they need. So it's up to the vendor to make sure, and it does come back to the cost at the end of the day. Say to the manufacturer that why challenge them? Why do you need to do this part of your requirement? Why is that so necessary to you? You don't need to, and I've seen it. I've seen it several times where they buy some area of functionality which they really do not benefit from. It's
Yeah.
just getting into the detail of those requirements. So never overscope.
Yeah. A lot of times I've seen manufacturers buy licenses first and then, they're stuck with that. And then they build solutions around those licenses. That is something that was very, I don't know, I couldn't fathom it when I, got to experience it first time.
Yeah, I mean, the license is not just for the functionality or the modules that they purchase, but also, which is could be part of overscoping, but also the number of users, end users on the shop floor, the supervisory, those in admin and IT. They'll come in. We've seen it just this week actually with one company. We have a spreadsheet for working out what they need in line with their requirements, and we come in with a number, we apply a contingency to that, or maybe 10% more than they actually need. But when we got into it, they required only half the licenses that they actually needed. It's all about the right level of questioning to understand. And to be honest with you, I think we should have established it much earlier in the process, the engagement process with them. But as
Yes.
we got into it, we identified they didn't need quite as much as they wanted, and the scope was a little bit more than they needed, to be honest with you. But they can have that later because it's all scalable. So, it comes back to the Big Bang thing at the end of the day. But
So now I am going to ask you the most interesting question that most of our listeners would be very interested in. And it's one of the main reasons why I do these podcasts, right? So imagine that I am a young undergraduate right out of college and I get a job working in an MES company, a manufacturer. And I am just trying to understand what MES is. There are a lot of books around there, a lot of videos, a lot of people talking about MES. And I have a knack for sales, and I think that I can be a good MES salesperson. What should be my roadmap in terms of, building a good career in, let's say, in the next 10, 15 years?
I think the first step is understanding what selling is.
Hmm.
Understand, I mean, there are some people with a natural ability to sell, but that doesn't mean that you're going to know everything about MES. So you got to align the two. So there is, yeah, of course, I talked about the need to understand the shop floor. Yeah, if you walk, say, for example, into NoMuda, and I think the first thing I would do with you, and I think this is appropriate, is I would take you to a number of manufacturers where we have implemented the solution to let you understand and meet the stakeholders in the business who made the decision to buy, NoMuda VisualFactory in my case, and let you understand the sort of things they were looking for. Customers love to talk about their success with MES, but they also love to talk about the failures as well. So they were we will always ask them to be very, very honest as a reference, but also for you, for example, if it were you visiting them, um, I would watch you. I'd be very keen to understand the questions that you would ask based upon what was shared with you. It's, the natural your natural ability, your charisma will, of course, count for a lot. And that will draw many questions from the manufacturer or the company that has been implemented with a solution. So I think that's the first place to start, was take you to factories where MES has been implemented, but also subsequently to new opportunities, new factories who are now considering an MES, and then align what you've heard with what you're about to hear. And
Hmm.
I think absolutely critical in the process. You can't just open a door and just go, I'm going to sell MES now. It just can't happen. I'm very
Yeah, I
passionate.
mean, I think it's very different from selling something like a shampoo. right? I mean, no offense to people selling shampoos, it's a very difficult job. But again, because the product that you're selling is so complex, you have to understand it fully well to be able to sell it. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. It's not about just knowing the terminology, it's how you express it, but you also got, and what it will deliver for the customer. So make sure, two ears and one mouth, right? It's the same thing. Listen more than you speak. And that is how you really that's how you the real lead into sales is to do if it might be more of a consultancy role to start with, to be honest with you. But yeah, if you're going to be selling, you've got to make sure that you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you get found out.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for your time. Um, I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I want you to give your feedback, good, bad, everything. I want you to be brutally honest and tell me how your experience was like on the Messy Mondays podcast.
Well, I ad-libbed everything. I don't have a script in front of me. I mean, obviously, I was aware of some of the questions you were going to ask, but this is all just saying it as it is. And I think that's something that really podcasts such as this really, and I'm sort of hoping, I imagine you are speaking to people in similar positions to me to to share their experiences, but they may all be different. And if they're all different, then that's great. But as long as everyone's transparent and telling the truth, and perhaps ad-libbing without a script would tell you the absolute truth. So I think this is very, very valuable because, equally, despite your age and my age, we all have the same passion, and that is in manufacturing and to make it better. I mean, I have a personal, being a Brit, I have a personal objective to help recover our manufacturing industry in the United
Yeah.
Kingdom. And if it means that we have to get into battles with customers to convince them how they can solve problems, then ourselves, like any other vendor, will be certainly targeting those companies to help them improve.
Yeah, this is the place where the industrial revolution began. So
Yep.
I think we owe it a little bit. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. It was a pleasure talking to you and hope to see
Likewise.
you soon on the Messy Mondays podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Kunal. Thank you.